Welcome to today's afikra conversation with Majid Alyousef. It's my pleasure to introduce Majid Alyousef. I have a lovely bio to read, so I'm really excited about this. Majid Alyousef is an award-winning artist and design veteran with decades of experience in creative design, typography, and Arabic calligraphy. His work has been featured in various galleries and institutions around the globe. Majid explores various approaches to modern and abstract presentations of calligraphy, in addition to his interest in mastery of classical forms and styles. As such, he co-founded Calligraforms, a radical new movement that reimagines calligraphy, offering abstract perspectives that draw upon the language of aesthetics, beauty, form, and balance. Majid pursued a bachelor's degree in fine arts from Iraq and a master's degree in interactive design and game development from the Savannah College of Art and Design in the USA. Following a successful career as a design director to a number of leading firms, Alyousef left the corporate world in 2011 in order to dedicate himself full-time to a studio practice. He participated in several exhibitions, including the Sharjah Islamic Arts Festival and the Sharjah Calligraphy Biennial of 2012 and 2014, during which he exhibited a triptych artwork that presented a distinctive style in its early age. The Noor Dubai Foundation Christie's auctions in both 2014 and 2015. He's also been exhibited at the Kuwait Islamic Arts Festival in 2016, the Medina Calligraphy Exhibition in 2018, Misk Art in 2018 in Saudi Arabia, and a number of exhibitions curated by Tashkil, the Dubai Center of Arabic Calligraphy, and other private galleries. Welcome, Majid. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm glad to be here as well.
Great. So I wanted to start off talking a little bit more about your journey into calligraphy and how these different kind of components have come to be for you. There's this interview on YouTube about you starting calligraphy because of some criticism from a teacher. And I noticed that something that's really central to your work is that you're self-taught and that, you know, you've committed yourself to the practice of calligraphy kind of like on your own volition. And I wanted to hear, what's that been like for you to kind of like have a much more individual driven towards calligraphy compared to like having a more traditional formalistic education with like a master, and how these different processes have informed your work and informed your style?
Well, I think like the major difference between these two journeys is the time and the way you learn things and the way you discover the steps that you have to take in order to learn. When you use or when you have a master, you know exactly like the steps that you're gonna take because you have classes, and based on the like corrections and advice that you take from your master, you can work upon that. But when you do that by yourself, you have to discover everything by yourself. Sometimes what helps me is like meeting other calligraphers, master calligraphers from time to time when there's an event or like a big exhibition or something, and asking questions. And actually that was one of the things that helped me a lot shaping the way or shaping the path that I would take later. I started at a very young age. I was around like 8 or 9, and for like the first few years I was drawing rather than doing calligraphy. Like even the calligraphy I do was like the drawing. I just see the word or the letter and try to imitate it using sometimes not calligraphy pens, just like regular pens or pencils. When I was 12, I met with a master calligrapher in my city in Basra in Iraq, and he started giving me lessons maybe for like 2 or 3 months on like weekly basis. I can say that he put me on the right track. Unfortunately, I couldn't continue with him because the situation was in the 80s during the war, the Iraq-Iranian war, and Basra was like under attack like all the time because it's on the borders. So we were like moving to other cities, and it was very difficult like to pursue even regular school rather than something like on the side. So that's why like I had to do my own research and my own way to learn.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I was really interested in that kind of like journey that you kind of have gone through, and that like different process and how that influences your individual style. And then I also noticed that you have like a lot of influences from different schools and different thought processes. So I know that you got your master's in interactive design. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about like why you decided to pursue that degree in particular, and then how has that influenced your current work and what that looks like for you now.
Okay, actually what happened is that during the 90s when I was like finishing my university and leaving Iraq, I was thinking of like what are like the possible ways I can entertain in order to get a professional career or anything like within that type of thinking. And interactive design was one of the things, because I studied like during the transitional period after school, graphic design and Photoshop and Illustrator, they were like in their early days. And I found a job in the field of web design back then in Jordan. I liked the field, and like since I was in school, I was also interested generally like in technology and science and math and all these things. So it wasn't very difficult for me like to go into that direction. So it happened. I just like to continue with that, to study more, and it was very. I can say it has a lot of potential back then, and that's how I've chosen to go for interactive design degree. But what happened with my like fine art practice is during my study, especially in the US, when I got more exposed to the Western art and Western design curriculum, I learned a lot about the art movements and the art schools there, and that's what affected my fine art practice. And later on, I moved back to art, and now I'm just doing my own business, because basically like working in interactive design now, it has to be like a team effort. It cannot be done by one person. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so that's it. Like my other hook was the Western art, especially the modern era, like the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, and what happens what happened during the wars and between the wars. That was like a very interesting part of my study, and that what affected me later in my calligraphy practice.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I think that even for me, the modern art period was particularly moving because of just the way that European artists were grappling with the social circumstance of the time. It was like a lot of like visceral processing of trauma. It was a lot of like commentary on war, a commentary on ideologies. It was the moment where so many ideologies had kind of fused together and resulted in a particular reality that people were now starting to grapple with. And in a way that's completely different from contemporary art now. And yes. I know that like in a lot of the ways that you kind of like talk about your art, you think that it's like there's a lot of art currently has like a very social, political commentary element, but you're much more interested in like the abstracted experience of that. But do you think that there is actually kind of like some kind of relationship between like there being like a more visceral reaction to a modernized or abstract art that does actually have like some repercussions or some understanding of, you know, the way that we feel as bodies in a particular social political time? And is that kind of like informing the way that you do your work? That was very loaded.
Yeah. It's actually interesting. It's not just a question. I mean, this is a subject like you can have like a book written about.
This is a thesis.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. I was aware of that, but I don't think like personally in my practice I used that as a motive, because maybe the way I was raised in Iraq during a very totalitarian period, it wasn't allowed for us like to talk or to say anything that is not accepted by the mainstream or the government. And to a certain degree, that was the same situation in many European countries. Like it was in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, and like everywhere, it was almost the same. But my focus was on the aesthetics. So I wanted to study more the aesthetics, the theory of abstraction, like what type of of thoughts or philosophies that the Russian artists did, like in their abstract geometry, or what Cubism did, and that was like the most motivational for me to experiment with, especially that because calligraphy itself is also an abstract. It's not like painting, because in painting you usually try either to take an object that exists in reality and like reformat it and put it in the way you look at it on canvas. In calligraphy, you already deal with abstract shapes. Letters are just like abstract shapes. And then I tried to make like a combination between the abstract that I deal with, which are the letters, and the abstract thinking, which is what Cubism and constructivism and futurism did. So yeah, my practice maybe was a bit more academic and technical rather than social. Yeah, I can see it from like this perspective.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit more about that, because I think that people who frequently cite are Mondrian, and you're really interested in like the Bauhaus movement. I photos of that, but I guess oh, now it's just going to play the video itself. Okay, so you have some of yours.
Okay.
Some Bauhaus photos as well. But
yes.
Yeah, I actually really wanted it, because like when I was reading about your work, what I noticed is that it's a very disciplined approach to the creation of it, right? Like you are first looking at a word, you're thinking about like the shape of it, you really are kind of like grappling with it in a very kind of like intimate and like very kind of as if you're kind of like constantly trying to approach a particular axis. And I think Bauhaus tries to do that too, both with colors, both with emotions, both with like lines and that like visceral, but also that kind of like intellectual experience of art.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask, like, how has that come to be? Like, what, how has that thought process unfolded for you? Has that something that you kind of like approached over time, or was it like you saw Bauhaus and I'm like, this makes sense, like this is exactly how I wanted to start thinking about my artwork? Or was it more like something that piqued your interest and then you continue to like play with calligraphy until it kind of began to make that kind of internal logic for you?
Actually, it happened over time. It took me a few years, like since the first time I started to think about it, and I couldn't like solve the problem that how to apply principles of Bauhaus or Cubism into calligraphy. And but the turning point happened like maybe overnight. I just thought of the letters. I still like remember that moment when I thought of the letters as objects, like physical objects, and then tried to draw them and focus on like on their outline instead of the actual body of the letter. And that moment I noticed that I can deconstruct each letter in a different way than what I used to think, and started doing some like small experimentation and sketches, yeah, that was like the moment. Like from the first few attempts, I managed to come up with some interesting designs, and then I just built upon that until I managed to make like the first composition for a painting.
Yeah,
that was like end of 2013, I remember.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah, no, that's so interesting, because I'm always interested in like how artistic practices emerge over time, because they're kind of like this like mosaic of all the different experiences and thought processes that we've kind of absorbed over our lifetime. Focusing a little bit more on like medium, I wanted to ask, like, what particularly drew you to the Thuluth script? How do you think about that script in relation to others? Is that something, is like, what would you even describe your relationship to Thuluth as? Like, how has that kind of like even changed over time? Like, what's that been like?
Now, Thuluth is different than the other forms of calligraphy because it's more figurative. It needs like actual writing, calligraphy, and drawing and carving the letter. It is more demanding, especially in these areas. While in other forms of scripts, you can write like long lines and full pages and books. So it doesn't really allow you to do a lot of that. It's like all the letters in it are big. They have very distinctive and intricate shapes, and you need to have skills in drawing, like technical drawing as well, plus calligraphy in order to achieve it. What I liked more about it is the flexibility and the ability to make different compositions out of it, which makes it more like flexible to in order like to make shapes if you want to make to look at it from different perspectives and make it like physical, like an object or sculpture. It is very different. It has like these properties that makes it very different from other scripts. Until now, I think like after practicing for a long time, the brain starts to develop like special setup to work only with it. Just a couple of months ago, I had a commission to write a long verse, I had like to use different fonts, not just Philip, because I need like something that is legible online, and it was like very tedious. Like physically, I was exhausted because I'm not used to do something like this. Even though it wasn't that big, I used like a very small pen. But working with small pens and long lines is something I'm not used to, so it was more challenging for me than writing Philip compositions. Even though Philip as a script is considered the most difficult, and like many calligraphers just don't even practice it because it's very complex.
Oh, that's interesting, because the way that I've been thinking about it is that it does have like a much more organic texture compared to others that kind of like make it a little bit more plastic than other scripts. And then I also was really interested, like, was it a script that like when you first started calligraphy you were like, I really like this, or was it something that you kind of like grew to appreciate over time, and you in the beginning you were kind of like experimenting with the different scripts and trying to figure out
actually from the beginning, like since like the first couple of books of calligraphy that I got when I was in the elementary school, I liked it a lot more. Right? It was just visually more attractive to me than the others, even though we grew up learning that in order to be a calligrapher, you have to start with like with Roqa and then move like slowly from one to another, one script to another. But like I started with Roqa, that was fine. But after that, I jumped directly into Thuluth. So I just like couldn't wait. It was more attractive to me visually, especially.
No, I love that. I love that there's like a resonance that was kind of like immediate. And that kind of like develops over time. I think the other thing that's really interesting about calligraphy is like, once you get really intimate with a script, it becomes very automatic. And I think that's interesting. True. Doing a new script felt very cumbersome or tedious now because of like the kind of relationship that you've cultivated with Thuluth in particular.
True, I think, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I know that we what I'm really interested in kind of like hearing a little bit more about, as we've kind of unpacked a little bit about calligraphy, we've unpacked a little bit about art. And I think that naturally leads us to talk about Calligraforms. And I know you were thinking about talking about like, what's the distinction? What do you see as a distinction between Calligraforms and Hurufiyya? And then how has Calligraforms kind of evolved for you over time? And like, how I know you talk about it as like it's much more like an approach, it's not particularly an artistic school, and I wanted to hear you talk through that process and what it's been like for you.
Okay, I think the main distinction between Hurufiyya and Calligraforms is that Hurufiyya first started like a few decades ago, and the artists who started or initiated the whole Hurufiyya movement were painters. They were not calligraphers. So it was like the impression of calligraphy on painters. Like if we talk about like the Impressionism in painting as well, like the European Impressionism, it was like their way to represent nature. In Hurufiyya, it became like the painter's way to represent calligraphy, the way they see the texture or the monuments or anything like in buildings or mosques or any other application. So it wasn't calligraphy, it was an impression of calligraphy by a painter. In Calligraforms, the direction was different. It was like the other direction, because I was a calligrapher, I wasn't a painter. And I thought calligraphy, with all its complexity or intricacy, can contribute to painting. It can be a form of abstract art. So the direction was like the opposite direction. I started from from calligraphy and moved to painting, to transform it into an abstraction, or like a new visual language that sometimes it's like totally abstract. Sometimes I still use words or symbols or silhouettes or something like this, but it's still experimental. I still feel like I'm experimenting with it, and there's a lot of potential that could be discovered with time.
Yeah, and I think this ties into another thing that I think is personally resonant to you, and something that you kind of like state in some of your writing is you're really interested in the social position of the artist in society, and like this idea that the artist is one that reflects on the society, the artist is one that comments on what they're observing, or begins to kind of like produce this kind of like in between like the physical experience of society and like the socio-emotional and rational way that we think through that experience. And so do you see that kind of like emerging in some of the thought process of Calligraforms? And then if not that, or in addition to that, how do you kind of like see your own positionality with that? And like, how does that inform your artistic practice personally?
I think it does, because it's even more possible through Calligraforms, because like when we talk about social commentary in painting, it's more like usage of symbolism. While in Calligraforms or in calligraphy in general, you can use symbolism plus you can use words or hidden words, which is even like more literal. So I think the possibilities are open when we talk like about that realm. Until now, I haven't done a lot in that field, but I'm thinking of it. I have like just some simple experiments on things that are a reflection of like social or political events or anything like or something like within that field. But nothing is published yet, I think. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's really important, because like these things are always so dynamic, right? And to like fully realize all these different thought processes takes time, and like
of course, yeah. And
we'll get some more questions about that, because I'm also interested in kind of like that iterative process of like where each person is in their journey at any particular moment of time.
That's true.
Yeah. I'm actually going to kind of pivot a little bit and start talking about like individual projects, just to hear more about like what that thought process has been like, what that process has been in general. So we have this beautiful photo of a work that was commissioned in 2014 of the Room of the Emirates in Geneva, the horse in the background. And so I wanted to ask a few questions. So first, how did the project come about? Like, does this kind of like tie back into like your previous, quote unquote career, where you were like working more in like design and had that kind of experience, and like this is how it's kind of like morphing into your current work? How does a commission like this work? And then how does it become something that's digital, or something that's like physically in place, compared to like, we think about calligraphers traditionally as like working with a reed and paper, and then now more commonly on digital platforms and through like digital art. But how does this particular work come to be?
Yeah, but it was actually maybe by chance. What happened back then is that I just posted a few artworks, a few like new Calligraform artworks online, and I was also in Sharjah biennial. I had the 3 pieces over there. The style was new; no one have seen it before. But what happened, like the architect who was working on that room in the building, a Swiss architect, and like the whole team was in Switzerland. They were like looking for something new, like modern calligraphy, or something that represents the Arabic and the UAE culture, or visual art that they can put there. And he just liked the pieces that I posted online. I didn't even know about them. They just decided to contact me and see if I can do something for them, because they thought it's different and it was unexpected. Somehow, when they did their research on like the classical and the modern work that was inspired by the Arabic heritage or Arabic like visual heritage, they said it was predictable. Most of the things they saw were predictable, or they saw it before. This was something new, so they decided like to contact me. And there was also an office here in Dubai that facilitates like the whole process. So my work was just developing sketches in the beginning, then doing the digital artwork later based on that piece. They told me like what kind of specifications they needed, because this is a cutout and there's LED light behind it, behind the wall. So that was also some good experience for me, because I haven't worked at that time. I haven't worked before on like big wall art pieces, and especially with like manufacturing and installation processes. So yeah, that's how it happened.
And then, is there a particular reason how the work kind of like evolved to depict a horse, or is that kind of just like the way that the artistic process went? Or was
that was actually part of the brief. They wanted to have like to see if they can add a symbol that is related to the Emirates there. So we practiced with horse and with the falcon. The falcon then also was like overly used in so many platforms. So the horse, it looked better with the whole design, because the design also, it has dunes or waves, and these two things are related also to the Emirates, the sea and the desert. And then the horse just came directly out of them. So it was more suitable or in tune together. That's why it's a horse now.
And then could you talk through just like a little bit more about like the process of like how that design came to be? Like, did you start with the brief of like, we want a particular image, and then you started to create words that fit that image, or like was there kind of like a different process for?
Yeah, they didn't want specific words. They wanted something that is so generic, just like a celebration of calligraphy, something like this. And what I worked with, but they wanted symbols. They wanted something that is related to the UAE. So I started first with the words and with the dunes, because I thought that will just work seamlessly without even like showing any pictorial elements. And then after that, they asked for experimentation with mainly with the falcon and the horse. The horse was like a better choice. Now the dimensions, of course, were also sent to me like right from the beginning, because this piece is almost like 6 meters wide and around like 1.5 height. It wasn't very comfortable to work with, but it was an interesting experience.
Okay, no, that sounds great. And then I wanted to kind of like show something kind of different, which this looks like a more, traditional kind of gallery-esque home decor work. What's the process that goes into like creating something like this compared to something that's like more formally like a commission that's like symbolic? How do these kind of works come to be?
These ones, actually, these are older. They are like few years before the work in the UN building. By that time, I was just like dealing with the actual letters and trying to create like modern compositions out of them, and that's how these specific pieces came up. It was they were not commissioned. It was actually like my personal work, and then later on they were obtained by a collector. But the idea there was just like looking at letters from new perspective, but it wasn't very radical. It was still like in the beginning.
Yeah.
So I was just like cutting letters from some unusual areas, and sometimes like recomposition them, changing the rotation, the size, and these things.
Yeah, no, I think that what drew me to these works originally is that they do have like this kind of like experimental nature, but it's kind of like in a way kind of, for lack of a better word, like a little flirtatious, right? It's just like, it's really edging on this idea of like, what could something new look like? And the splicing and like the separating into like these, you know, panels makes it kind of like, it gives this kind of like spaciousness that I think is really interesting because of like the way that we're usually thinking about letters of being like so close together and maybe more connected or more intimate in some ways.
True. And actually one of the things that I was thinking about back then is to show like one letter or a part of a letter, because these parts are by themselves are very difficult to achieve and they are very demanding. Like most people don't recognize that unless they actually practice calligraphy. They just see that the whole composition or texture that is made of so many letters, but actually each letter is very demanding and complex by itself. And when I put like a piece with only one letter, it's like I'm trying to communicate that to people just to see all these curves and joints and terminals and how they are written or made and how actually they are all thought out and difficult and not just random. So
no, I think that's something that stood out to me the more that I've like been reading about calligraphy is that there's a process by which you start learning letters. You know, there are easier letters to make and then there are harder letters to make. And then within what makes a lot of the letters difficult is that there's the nukat, there's like the spacing, and then you have to consider how you're going to be adding like the pressure of the brush or like the accentation of the like particular letter. And I think that this kind of work and this kind of separation really does highlight that. Just because we're starting to like get really familiar with the curvatures and like the particularities of them.
True. Yeah.
Moving to a different project, Kleenex, which is also around 2014 as well. But how did this commission come about? How do you think about putting calligraphy on a box and on different dimensions? And like, instead of like, you know, just like again, it's like playing with that kind of idea of form where you don't get a flat surface area.
Yeah, exactly. And
how do you think about that?
This was also part of the 3D thinking process, because like the first thing when you think of 3D, you think of just extruding letters, and you have like blocks that you can see from one side, and they just look like letters from one side. In this one, the idea was to have an actual 2D work wrapping around a box or a 3D object to give it just different views or different perspective. And one of the challenging parts here was the actual composition and the center of vision, because in compositions you usually like have one element or one direction you try like to attract people or to attract the eyes to see. In this one, you have to create multiple ones, and they have to look like very nicely and harmonic together from wherever you look at them, without like overkilling the whole design or making it just dull with so many complex shapes. And and I think that was like the experiment and the challenge behind it. The designs themselves were based on actual paintings I have, but they were then like modified and customized to fit on the boxes.
And then something that's like really particularly interesting about this, and even when you think about it from a marketing perspective, is the use of color. And I know for you, you're really interested in color as a place of intervention, a place of creating like attention even within an artwork. How does it kind of like come to be in this one? Were you given a limited color palette? Did it look a particular way? How did you use color intentionally in this particular project?
In this particular one, it was the contrast between like the hot and cold, but I didn't want to use like the extreme colors, like the Mondrian colors. I went to the middle. I used some sort of like orange, yellow, and blue. And then I thought it wouldn't be very balanced, because these colors are contrasting and they are they cannot be like the main actor in the artwork. So I use the black because black it creates a composition, and at the same time it is not perceived by human brain as color. When you see black, usually you think it's just black. It somehow is not associated with colors. So yeah, and the same thing almost with gray. So that's why it looks like very basic, just only 2 colors. Actually, you have like 4 different grades of letters, but the ones that you look at are just 2, the blue and the yellow.
Right. And I'm going to kind of draw us back to a less commercial work, but we're looking at like a lot of color here as a way to like create outline. I think this was 2 years later, so this was in 2016, so a little bit more time. How did these particular works come about? How did you think about the coloring? How like I'm actually like quite particularly interested in the alif, like that green, right? The way that you create the form is really interesting. Like, where do you begin to think of like where the negative space should go? I can make some assumptions, but I really wanted to kind of like dive in a little bit more deeply into that work, because it's kind of like people are like, oh, well, it's a stick, but you've managed to create a lot of volume and definition around this particular letter. I wanted to hear about that thought process.
Well, this one in particular, it was after I read about the visual cognition and how the brain works when we see things. And one of the paragraphs in that article I read was talking about like how colors and lines are things that we create. They don't exist in nature. They are like physically there's no color and there's no line, but we create them, like the brain creates these to form or to understand reality. So that was like the main motivation behind this piece. I tried just to imagine if there is some sort of uneven, wavy background behind the letter, and the letter itself is like imposed on the top, in front of it. And I just imagined how the shadow will look like if we have multiple lights, if these lights are not interacting with each other, so we wouldn't have a uniform light and shadow distribution. And I was just like practicing, seeing how each part of a shape will look like, focusing mainly on the very important turns or curves in each letter that you can like recognize the letter from, and in the same time just see which one is just more pleasing for the eye. And this was the result. So it's very experimental, and until now I still find this very interesting kind of work to do. I did a couple of other pieces afterwards in like with different direction, but it's all like based on this approach.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting, because like I think that they're absolutely brilliant, and they're really yeah,
Thank you.
I think they are. But I'm going to move us a little bit more quickly to make sure that we get through all the other kind of works. I'm going to move us really quickly through this one because I wanted to focus on some other artworks. There's the Baskin Robbins work, which is from 2018. It's from Ramadan.
Yeah.
How this one is actually quite different, because especially compared to Kleenex, we have a lot of color here, and a lot of like forms that are getting kind of like interplayed on a very different volume, a very different shape. How was this project like? What was the way that it kind of like came to be? What were you thinking about when you came to the design here?
Yeah, so since this also was a commercial project, I had a brief to work with, and the brief was celebration of Ramadan and Eid. So the design has to be very dynamic and celebratory, and at the same time colorful, because Baskin Robbins, they are known for having like many flavors, and they want to show that or to give that message in their designs. It was challenging because the design was very complex, and there were like so many places I have to fill with colors. And sometimes like working with colors could be easy when you have like, let's say 4 or 5 colors, but having so many places and you have to create a lot of contrast and in the same time harmony was like the challenging part. So I worked first with the basic colors and black, and then tried to like move from the red to pink or orange and see how they will fit together. And that's how you can like see how they are usually close to get together, because visually they will be easy to follow. And then creating contrast in other parts, and following up with the contrast, like the lighter blue, the darker blue, and then the green and the darker green. So it's experimentation, but in the same time, there was a lot of thought behind it to create something that doesn't look just like a random use of color. The colors themselves were very challenging, more than the design, but I think I managed to come up with something in the end.
Yeah, that was originally what I was going to say. I think like to create so much dynamism and still have harmony is a really difficult like line to toe. But then I think what's really interesting in hearing you talk about it is the discussion of like how you worked across the color wheel to create that kind of harmony, and what that process is like, and the trial and error that comes through these like different shades and the different colors themselves and how they speak and interact with one another.
Yes. Yeah, because it's a journey, like even for the viewer, it's a journey. When they explore the whole artwork, they need to feel that they are enjoying it and that they are discovering things. It's not like just surprises with random colors that will actually ruin the work, even if it's not clear. But when someone like look a little like more into the piece, they can see when it's just not that nice.
Right. I think like that gets to something that I know is really important to you, which is like there needs to be like some coherence with an artistic vision and a clarity and a clarity with regards to like the skill set or the technique. And I think that that's what shines through in this particular work, that kind of like is a lot of the way that this work gets produced.
True.
Transitioning to a bigger project.
Okay. Yeah.
On New York Times in Times Square in New York, on Nasdaq. How did this project come to be? Like that's a tremendous accomplishment. How did this happen?
Thank you very much. Actually, this one, the designs or the artwork themselves were developed before for various occasions and commissions. The work itself was for the Arabic language day. Since Nasdaq opened their offices in Dubai, they wanted like to represent the Arab culture when there's like any special event or special day in New York. And for the Arabic language day specifically, they wanted something that has the language, which was calligraphy, but they wanted something again new, not like the traditional Islamic art, and also something that doesn't that doesn't feel predictable, like the same thing that happened before with the work I did in the UN building. And yeah, that's how it worked. I met first with the people in Nasdaq Dubai, and they have selected these pieces to be shown in New York. And yeah, that was it. It was actually simpler than I thought.
Oh, okay. No, that's lovely. I'm going to fast track this a little bit more. So I'm going to show some general works and then follow up with one question, get through the quick Q&A, and then open it up to audience questions. The question I wanted to ask is, what are you reworking or rethinking right now? Like where are you at in this moment artistically, and what are you thinking about experimenting with next, or what are you currently experimenting with, and how is that changing the way that you think about your artwork, or even like the way that you want to practice calligraphy or visual art in general?
Currently, and like for the past few years, I was working on 3D and trying to represent calligraphy or calligraforms in 3D space or in sculptures. Still, I have a couple of works done, but there's still like so much to learn and so much to do. And I'm actually happy with the actual work that I've done. In the same time, I did just recently a project. It was actually a PhD thesis in Oxford University for like some of the researchers there. They are working on developing a very small nib in the nanotechnology lab, and they wanted, because it looked like a calligraphy nib in the end, and they wanted to use it to do some calligraphy as a piece for the project, and they chose. Sorry, they've chosen one of my works also to be presented there, and we've done it actually. The work was released last month, and it was featured on Nature magazine. It was just a small work done in like a very small area. It's like 3 microns, with maybe the smallest piece of calligraphy ever. It's the 3 microns is like 3 to 1,000 of the millimeter. So it's like extremely small. Yeah, it's like just a few bacteria. You can just put them on.
That's interesting. That's so interesting. Like to hear you experimenting more with space and how it impacts, you know, your practice and the different forms that you're creating. I think it's absolutely wonderful and exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So quick Q&A. What are you reading or watching right now?
Reading and watching. Okay, reading a book called Boom. It's about the business of art, and especially like the period after the Second World War in the US, and how the boom started in New York, and what happened afterwards. It's a very interesting read. Not very artistic, but in the field of history and like social science, let's say, it's a very interesting read.
Yeah, definitely. Especially since the art business impacts what kind of art gets made, and
yeah, and how it is all started, like how things like abstract expressionism took over, like it was like in the 40s and 50s, how the styles like of Paula Rothko and the other artists, they like managed to create like a totally different movement away from Europe, and how that was successful, and was it successful from the beginning or later on, and how business affected that, and like all these things together. It's a very interesting reading.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
Okay, if it's about art, like if I have to choose an artist, like from the past, I think it would be Michelangelo. I like the character and like the whole achievements that he did. From the current period, maybe I'm like moving like to the other direction. It's Brito, the Brazilian painter. I like his practice. I like the way he like branded his work and managed to achieve what he did.
And then what do most people misunderstand about your work?
It's how easy or difficult it is. Like many people, especially when they see like the Calligraforms, they think it's something I can just do in a few minutes, just holding the pen and making swooshes left or right, and it happened. That's actually not true. It's very complex, and it's like walking on. It's like you're doing circus show. It's very difficult. It needs special skills and being able to draw very thin lines for like over a very specific curve and bearing. It's like really difficult, and then finishing that with a very fine pen. It's not easy, but it looks easy. So I think that's the thing they usually misunderstand.
Definitely. And then whose work do you admire and are inspired by?
Mainly, I think Ilizhevsky from the Russian Russian school. Tullio Crowley from Futurism. I think like he's one of the greatest, even though I'm not a painter, but there are so many things in the way he does, like, or he did actually, the compositions and how lines are, curves are just adjusted together. It's just very, very inspiring. I think maybe these two are very, very inspirational, as well as Mondrian, of course, and Joan Miro. These may be like my like the first name that I can come up with, because they're always in the back of my head.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to give Tala the mic to ask a question. Yes, I can read it. Okay. What advice would you give to beginners in calligraphy? I recently started doing calligraphy on my own and would like some inspiration and advice.
They need to be patient. That's very important, because when they start, they think it's easier than it actually is, and that would be like the main shock. After that, if they have the patience, it will be fine. They will achieve.
Okay, this was wonderful. I really enjoyed talking to you and hearing more about your practice. If people want to follow Majid, his Twitter and Instagram handles are here. And if you could please take a moment to fill out our feedback form, that would be wonderful. Oh, here's a comment. Oh yeah. All right. No, it was wonderful having you. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you all for being here. This was absolutely delightful. And I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday, everybody.